What was the heretical reason that Yoda banished a group of Padawans from the Jedi Order? What crime and exploration did they commit that was so egregious that Yoda banished them from their home? Within the Jedi Order, there have been many instances where Jedi will adopt their own views on the Force and all of its aspects. While many of the Jedi are encouraged to explore the mysteries of the Force, oftentimes it can result in very dangerous ideologies forming that threaten to bring impressionable young minds under the influence of the dark side. This is why the Jedi Council usually has such strict ruling on what can and cannot be studied, as well as what ideas are considered to be acceptable within the Order. While they definitely went off the deep end with this around the era of the Clone Wars, they at least had a good reason considering that there has been a great number of Sith who have risen from the very ranks of the Jedi. But in today's holocron, we are going to talk about a time during the Republic Classic era, sometime just before the Clone Wars, that Yoda would vote to banish a group of Padawans, those that had adopted a philosophy in the Force that not even the Sith cared for. Today, we will be addressing the radical view in the Force known as potentium. But before we get into it, we have had a terrible vision through the Force. Many of you that have visited our archives before have not yet subscribed, so if you've been enjoying the daily updates on Star Wars lore, reach out and crush that subscribe button. It is your destiny. The idea behind potentium is that there was no light side nor dark side within the Force. They believed that the Force itself, with its all-encompassing existence and every one of its potential abilities, was the light. According to the followers of this creed, the supposed dark side was in fact a corrupted and a twisted use of the Force for evil purposes. Basically, according to potentium, the light and the dark exist within the person and not the Force itself. The eternal struggle to overcome the dark side was not a battle fought within the Force, a battle within oneself. And because there was no dark side, there were no dark side actions or Force techniques. In effect, any action, light or dark, could be performed without risk as long as the intent was not evil. This meant that they believed that no abilities or facets of the Force were off limits so long as they used these abilities for the path of good. The dangerous conclusion to this philosophy would be that any action could be justified under the pretense of having been done with good intentions. This resulted in Jedi believing in potentium using actual Sith lightning and Force chokes, along with using mental terror on their enemies with no problems as long as they believed they were doing it for the righteous reasons. And so it came that the potentium believed that the Jedi Masters were simply afraid to explore the full reaches of the Force in order to unlock the potential that was latent within themselves. However, the Jedi argued with a point that answers a lot of questions. According to the High Council, it was the duty of the Jedi to use the Force to protect others, not study its absolute limits. Doing so would lead them to the dark side in pursuit of power and breaking those limits. Now, of course, it should be noted that some of the followers of potentium still attempted to avoid the dark side. Having said that though, they saw darkness as something within themselves to be avoided, not something that existed in the Force. The followers then went on to believe that the Force was the energy that flows through all life, and therefore the dark side as the Jedi believed it, simply came from the corruption of humanity. They felt that if they could be perfectly moral, they could be immune to the corruption of the dark side, and therefore use any technique that they wanted. Because of this thinking, the High Council theorized that potentium was a poisonous philosophy bred from Sith trickery. However, ironically, the Sith had nothing to do with this, and in fact, they wouldn't even touch the philosophy themselves, disliking it just as much, if not more, than the Jedi. The Jedi thought it was a cheap trick of the Sith, and the Sith despised it. On this, the Jedi and the Sith agree. Potentium was useless, hopeful thinking. In the Darth Plagueis novel, this is what Plagueis says on potentium to Sidious. No doubt the texts I've provided contain references to the so-called potentium theory, that light and dark depend on the intention of the user. This is yet another perversion of the truth perpetrated by those who would keep us shackled to the Force. To become one of grandiloquent power requires more than mere compliance. What's needed is obstinacy and tenacity. This is why you must always be receptive to the current of the dark side, because no matter how nimble you are, or think that you are, the Force will show you no pity. Plagueis is trying to teach Sidious that pursuing power is far more than just letting it happen or not. It requires intention and pursuit. The Sith embrace the dark side by being unapologetic about their cruelty, their rage, and their passion. They don't care for labels like good nor evil. They only care for power. Not even the Sith like potentium, because they find it to be a weak excuse for a force wielder to use the dark side, but to litter it with excuses for why they indulge. The Sith indulge because it is their right. They need no excuse, no reason. Plagueis both finds this and the Jedi's version of Force Lightning Electric Judgment to be pathetic facsimiles of what the dark side can offer. Make no mistake though, the Sith believe that potentium is dangerous. They believe this because flirting with the dark side without committing to it will cause the darkness and the Force to eventually lash out violently, sweep one into a state of madness that could destroy them. The philosophy of potentium first came about sometime around the year 132 BBY, the Republic Classic era. During this time, it was more of a small school of thought than an actual fully formed philosophy, a philosophy that the Jedi Council attempted to stomp out nearly immediately. But here's where we introduce to our story a man known as Leor Hal, who started a potentium cult within the Jedi as a Jedi himself. Hal recruited Padawans in the Order who he believed would follow him freely, and would even go out and find prospective Jedi among Force-sensitive children on the worlds of Alderaan and Coruscant without the Council's knowledge. For this reason, Yoda and the Council would banish Hal along with all of his followers, considering this dangerous ideology to be a threat to the Jedi, the people of Coruscant, and the Force. However, Hal didn't actually have any ill will towards the Jedi, nor did any of his followers, but they accepted this banishment and would find another world by the name of Zonama Sekhet to continue practicing in the Force. What's even more fascinating though, is that Yoda didn't actually label the followers of Potentium Dark Jedi, and gave them a different name. He classified them as Grey Jedi in the category, this being legends of course. This is why they were merely banished and not destroyed. The Council could sense that they wanted to only do the right thing and were not making themselves an active threat, but their beliefs were too dangerous to be kept around the Jedi. Many years later, in 44 BBY, Qui-Gon Jinn and Mace Windu would have a run-in with the Potentium apprentices, and later, Obi-Wan and a young Anakin would follow in their footsteps to find the world that they had been banished to. This planet was alive and cognizant within the Force. But what's even more fascinating is that Sekhet actually became a follower of Potentium himself, the planet obeying the philosophy and the theory behind it, going so far as to consider itself something of a guardian of the Force. Hal and his followers had come to the world after their banishment and set up their livelihoods here. When the world awakened, Hal had been there to connect with it and convince it that their philosophy of the Force was correct, indoctrinating the young living world into believing that it had a duty to protect the Force using potentium. Star Wars Legends can get very strange, but at the same time exceptionally interesting. Because of this, the world had lashed out at its enemies using destructive darkside powers and had killed many. By the time Anakin met the world, the two had a conversation where the world revealed its greatest distress, having regret at having murdered many that it now believed may have been innocent or could have been redeemed. It no longer believed in Potentium and denounced the ways that Hal had taught it. This is the heartbreaking confession that the world gives to the now 12-year-old Anakin Skywalker. He told me I was the Potentium, the force behind all life. He thought I reached everywhere. I don't. I'm just here. He saw what he wanted to see and told me what he wanted to hear me speak into his own ears. He said that there was no evil in the universe, only good. I did not see how wrong he was until he died. Then I reached out with the weapons that we had made, and I killed. The Magister had said that this would be good, but I knew that it was not. Potentium may seem attractive at first, but what Potentium does not take into account is that the Force, as a living entity, has its own will. As human beings have good and evil within themselves, so too does the Force, hence the light side and the dark side. Potentium is born of ignorance and lacks all accountability. It wouldn't be until Grandmaster Luke Skywalker discovered the last descendants of Potentium and resolved to teach them the truth of what the Force really had to offer. But anyway, my friends, thank you so much for visiting the channel today. What are your thoughts on Potentium and the fact that Yoda banished this group of Padawans from the Jedi? Was he correct? And was Potentium dangerous? Thank you so much, my friends, for visiting the channel today, and may the Force be with you.